Now, today, what do we have today? Oh, we have invited Dan to speak again, and he has chosen the intriguing topic, universal patterns and archetypes. Take it away.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, guys. Guess we'll just wait for everybody to have a seat.
There's a seat here.
There's a seat over there.
So I chose the topic archetypes and universal patterns. It's such an all-encompassing topic. It pretty much includes everything to do with form and to do with sacred spots, to do with math, to do with, Carl Jung talks about the archetypes of the collective unconscious, different parts of ourselves, different ways of thinking. So archetypes and patterns just include so much. So I thought about 13 different things to talk about. And I really only picked one thing. Because when I realized, I'm like, okay, I'm going to give this presentation, so I'm like looking at all the things that archetypes could be. And it's massive. All different forms in the human experience. Anything that we experience in the outside world and the universe takes shape and form in order for us to be able to relate to it. So a lot of this stuff that we see in the universe is like a projection of ourselves. It's like we're actually seeing ourselves, and all is one, and one is all, so really everything's coming from the source. So everything kind of starts with a circle. And so out of the 13, so I came up with all these different categories that archetypes would fit into, and I came up with about 13. And I realized, okay, well, I can really only talk about part of one of the topics, and I'm just going to cover, what I can with that. Now, does anybody know what archetypes is? Anybody have an idea?
So the primal idea,
Right.
coming from the highest source and
Right.
downward forming,
Yeah.
Like a pattern.
like a
Right.
pattern,
Right. Exactly.
which consciousness picks up on and builds upon and accretes.
Well, yeah, that's interesting, and so that's why I chose for one of the 13 topics I decided to cover is sacred geometry. And so I could have covered many other topics. Now I put together a slideshow, and I just wanted to sort of give you an idea of how I arranged different topics, because I want to go over all the different ideas that archetypes would fit under. So I'm going to open this presentation here. And any other ideas of what archetypes, what does it mean to other people? I'm curious, just for some feedback of what you think an archetype means.
Is the archetype the original of something, the basic of something?
Yeah, right, right. So, so in the beginning there was one, and you were talking about creation mythology pretty much last week, right?
Yeah.
So that was totally in line with the idea of how sacred geometry starts at its seed. You start with a circle, and then it breaks off. God wants to know itself.
Yeah.
So, or the individual breaks off from God to discover itself.
Right.
So it breaks from one, and it has a circle, a circumference, and then it breaks itself off to observe itself. It splits into two. And then you have two circles, and they're kind of intersected, and you've got the Vesica Pisces, or like the Stargate, the original duality of the opposites, like male-female. And I'm going to go through all of these seeds of life and the flower of life, because these are the building blocks that I see. But once you have duality, you have two. You got opposites. You got male and female, night and day, winter, summer, night and dark, negative, positive, yin and yang. So we have these opposites. So maybe those are the two primordial archetypes, is male, female. And then you can split those again into, you can go from two circles to three, and you have the Trinity. So, the Trinity, the Holy Trinity, that's another way of branching off from two into three. And then eventually you can create what you would call like the seed of life. So I'm going to go through all that. And so what I want to show you first, I think I'll just try to start my slideshow from the beginning. So I want to talk about universal patterns and archetypes So it's what I came up with is it's an anthropocentrically divided system of perception of the universe. And I say anthropocentrically because everything we see in the universe is coming from our own perceptions of reality. So we're anthropocentrically, meaning from human consciousness projecting into the outside world and seeing our reflection. So we're perceiving the universe through our own lens, and it's hard to not be biased. I mean, if everything is one, then everything's one, and it doesn't mean things are really not divided. They're only divided in illusion. So it's interesting to divide, and what that creates. It creates color, it creates sound, different forms. So our experiential reflections of the universe. So that's kind of what the theme I wanted to give when I talk about universal patterns and archetypes. So archetype has many different definitions. So this is the etymology. Is that how you say that word?
Yeah.
Okay, the etymology. I looked it up, on the dictionary.com and Wikipedia and stuff. And what I kind of summed up from those definitions is that archetype is often talked about the original pattern from which copies are made. So we were talking about that. So it first entered in the English language apparently in the 1540s. And it's derived from the Latin noun archetypum, which means also the adjective form is archetypos, which means first modeled or beginning or origin or beginning from. So that pretty much includes every single thing in human experience, and everything we see fits into these archetypes. And we know that about quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and the way that the physical universe is created is based on these primordial structures. And there's many windows to see what those primordial structures are: sound, light, different fields of information in science, or the Platonic solids. So there's many ways of looking at how the universe is created. So other meanings, a concept that has a holistic approach, something that has universal acceptance, like an idea, gives context within a cultural paradigm. So you can see how broad this word is. So how does one talk about archetypes? You're going to have to just sort of get a big scope and then narrow it down. So I want everybody to be able to see this. So archetypes also refer to universal themes or motifs. And some of the most famous ways in which the word archetype is used is through Jungian psychology. Also Plato, and you have the Jungian archetypes. And I'm not going to read all of this, but it says Jungian psychology. Jung was saying that archetypes are highly developed elements of the collective unconscious, and so he talked a lot about deeper archetypes of which are universal to the unconscious. So maybe we have personal archetypes that are personal, but there's also the deeper collective archetypes as well. And so when Jung was referring to archetypes, he was usually referring to the archetypes of the collective unconscious, like those types of themes and metaphors and motifs that we get when we dream. And there's all kinds of books about dreams, dream analogy, and the dream, it's phenomenal that a snake or water, there's all these different themes that are universal to every culture. And Joseph Campbell looked at a lot of these, he called them motifs as well, these themes that run throughout history and throughout time, and different civilizations have these same base archetypes. And it's interesting because water, fire, air, and earth, the elements, so they are very strong archetypes. Whereas the animal archetypes too, right? You've got the snake, you've got rat, and if you look at the Chinese calendar, they break up the 4 major archetypes, right? Like fire, air, earth, and water? Or is there 5?
And metal.
And metal, right. So different cultures have slightly different meanings, and sometimes it's ether, right? Which means the field or the flux field might mean a circle. But yeah, then there's the main archetypes in the Chinese calendar, and then you have the sub-archetypes, I guess you could call them, like the animals, like the snake, the rat, the dog, which all have different meanings as well. Any comments on that?
You forgot the monkey.
The monkey? Oh, is there, I'm sure there's tons.
Oh, yeah.
The
It's
eagle?
12.
Okay, they broke them to 12, but
Yeah.
those 12 probably break up into another 12.
Yeah.
Right?
Could be.
And 144 is a very common archetype, and also 144,000 shows up in many cultures around the world. There's 144,000. But we can talk about some of that. Yeah, you want to say something?
Just that it's mind-boggling to think how many combinations of archetypes we each are in our superconscious as well as in our unconscious and conscious.
Yes.
And so no wonder our human psyche is so complex and
Yes.
it needs to smooth out.
It's amazing.
There's a lot going on there.
It's amazing. And I know certain people look like certain animals, and it's really obvious. You know, like there's certain people that look like a cat, like everybody agrees that person looks like a cat, right? So they've got that morphic field that they've shipped into as well.
Yeah, there's a system that classifies the human archetypes by way of like the warrior and the slave and the observer and the empress,
Right.
joker.
Yes.
You know, and
So you have the 22 major arcana types,
yeah.
archetypes
There's
as
the
well.
logician and yeah, I can't remember all of them, I guess, offhand, but that's basically taking those kind of forms.
Right. There's
I-
the Enneagram as
sorry.
well.
Yeah.
I always have a question about the snake. Why is the snake so popular in everything?
Well, certainly it powers.
It's the healer. The snake is the healer.
Why? What?
The snake represents the healer.
The healer.
Certainly in Western medicine.
Yeah, in Western medicine, that's right.
And then also,
But not only that, but all
Yeah.
kinds of other things.
It also
That's
represents
only
Why
the
the
life force
snake?
energy and the kundalini.
Oh, it just.
It represents transformation. The snake
Yeah.
sheds its skin, right?
Oh, right, yeah.
Like the moon sheds its shadow, apparently. Same, there's a relation between the snake and
Oh,
the
yeah.
moon also.
Oh, yeah.
But then the snake also represents in many cultures, you know, taking things into your own hand, like the snake told Eve to eat the fruit and stuff, right?
Yeah, all of that.
So the snake was considered evil,
Yeah.
but I think it also represents the birth into the tree of knowledge. It represents so many things.
Wisdom.
Yeah,
Wisdom,
yeah,
right, there you
exactly.
go, the tree of knowledge. So
Yeah.
it has so many meanings.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's a very strong archetype as far as animal,
Oh, so
And
you-
also could be used as an anti-serum,
right?
anti-serum.
Anti-serum?
Yeah.
Serum.
Anti-serum.
What?
Yeah.
The snake, you get a snake bite.
Yeah, snake bite, right.
Yeah. And then you have that, you go to the hospital and they give you that.
Right. Or like a shaman, you get bit on purpose so that you can become one with the poison and you get transformed.
Oh.
Sort of like,
That's right.
that's another way of thinking about it, I guess.
Well, shedding the skin, that makes a lot of sense to me, but there are so many other animals that have also poison and this and that and so on, so why the snake?
Yeah, I don't know, there's a lot you can say about the snake.
Every animal has
Yeah.
like tremendous, like individual powers and associations.
Yeah,
Every
exactly.
single animal in the
Attributes.
animal kingdom.
Yeah. So we've got these animal archetypes, but there's also sub-influences, and I think astrology is clearly a really good tool to represent, as a metaphor, some of the ways that we can perceive ourselves and the challenges that we would have in this dimension. So people are influenced by different planets, because different planets have different meanings, right? So Jupiter is an archetype, all the planets are archetype, the sun is an archetype. You know, and then we can go further on and we start looking at stars and seeing how they are also archetypes. So you have the archangel level archetypes, you have different civilizations as archetypes. So it just goes on and on and on.
Is that reality or is this a human projection?
It's a projection. It's
Well, I would say that's both, right? Like, what is reality? The physical.
It's a reflection of the original.
Is all this? Is this reality? Is this solid? So this isn't solid either, right? So nothing's really. I'm talking about physical matter. So that's not even solid either. But on physical matter, we have archetypes. We have the periodic table of elements, and those are all archetypes. And even the gold is a strong archetype. Right now we talk about alchemy. So an alchemy is a whole other level of knowledge as well. So Jung talks about primordial images. So there's so much, and then Plato also talked about archetypes as mental forms that were imprinted in the soul before we incarnated into the world. That's just one way of looking at it. The collective being, they embody the fundamental characteristics of a thing rather than a specific peculiarities. I'm not sure what they're talking about there. I thought I knew what I was talking about there, but now I don't remember. Did anybody understand that?
Well, on some level, I'm sure we all did.
Okay, let's just go
Yeah,
forward.
go on.
Archetypal psychology. So psychology is often used, archetypes are often used in the field of psychology, usually related to Jung, but not just Jung, many others as well. There's many books written about, archetypes. So archetypal psychology likens itself to polytheistic mythology in that it attempts to recognize the myriad of fantasies and myths, gods, goddesses, demigods, mortals, and animals that shape and are shaped by the psychological lives. So that's another way of looking at archetypes. So I want to get into the universal patterns and archetypes, and I kind of categorize them into 13 different ways. And I thought, well, 13 is a good number anyway, and it's also, the fruit of life. Does everybody recognize this symbol here? So that comes from the flower of life, and it's like one of the strongest symbols. So we have to break archetypes into different categories in order to talk about each one individually. So we talk about the global perspective, and like I said, I wanted to just focus on one. We're going to talk about each of the 13 first, but then we're going to focus on sacred geometry, because that's really exciting. And I think that's something that's easy to relate to, rather than alchemy. Alchemy can get a little more complex. We're talking about archangels. You talked about archangels. And that's another way of looking at forms and ways of relating to ourselves and to the universe.
Can
Yeah,
I just had a thought, Dr. David Hawkins.
right.
He actually calibrates all these archetypes.
Yes,
He calibrates the consciousness.
yes.
It's just mind-blowing how it just goes
It's
on
incredible.
and on.
Yeah,
It's
so
just so mind-blowing.
David Hawkins, developed a science that's so amazing that categorizes the frequency level or the vibration. How close is that idea to the feeling of unconditional love and the benefit of all humankind? So that's the rating scale. So, yeah.
I just remember, I love his work. It's brilliant. You get a higher vibration just from reading his work.
Right.
I remember, Marley was small when I was reading it, and it's one of the highest calibrations ever done is a loving mom at home baking with her children.
Oh, wow.
That's one of the highest.
A loving mom at home baking with her children.
Yeah, with the child
That's really
helping.
cool. That's really cool.
And it's such high vibration, simple things with
Right.
the highest vibration ever.
Yes. And these ideas, feelings, emotions, are archetypes. So there's major emotions that we have. And if you know what a Venn diagram is, it's a good way of showing different archetypes. A Venn diagram is sort of like bubbles that go into each other. So you have the major, you got anger, you have frustration, you have pain, sorrow. But then there's the sub-emotions that fit into the two categories, which are like the minor chakras and the major chakras. It's very interesting to think of it that way. And so this David Hawkins, this is one of the amazing things, is that there's a whole science behind how he calibrates things, and we know somebody who's really good at that. And Clayton's really good at that. So with David Hawkins, you have to ask specific questions, not just like, does that archangel, is it got a high vibration or low vibration? So you have to form the question properly. Like, will that archangel, for example, that idea, will that help me in this direction versus will it help me in this direction? So you have to be specific when you're asking questions as well when you're using that type of technology. Yeah, you're going to say something?
No, my hand was just
Oh, okay.
doing its thing.
And so, alphabets are archetypes. There's holographic alphabets, like Sanskrit or Hebrew. So there's really old languages that were very advanced, and they clearly came from a higher evolved civilization. Because, for example, the Hebrew alphabet, and it's hard to know what the origins of that were. Apparently, we don't know. but I'm sure somebody does know. But the Hebrew alphabet, for example, goes into the Taurus. So as far as archetypes, I will definitely say that the toroid, or the Taurus, is probably one of the most fundamental, because almost everything I'm going to talk about will fit into the Taurus.
You want to
Also.
explain the Taurus? Does everybody know what that means?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna explain the Taurus, and after we go through all these major different sets of archetypes. These are the different categories I came up with. So these are just systems or categories that have subsets of archetypes. And so sacred geometry at the very top there. So we can talk about different forms like the flower of life, the platonic solids, the vector equilibrium, the torus. There's all of these different shapes that affect consciousness. They affect the human aura, they affect the heart, they affect planetary systems, they affect weather, they affect language. This is really interesting. They affect harmonics. So we've got sacred geometry, and then we have biological systems of archetypes, which would be the animals, sound and light. So they all have like harmonics, resonance, the electromagnetic spectrum, gamma rays, delta rays. They all have different ways of explaining that there are different archetypes for that system. Astrophysical, so we're talking about nebulas, galaxies, those are archetypes. Universal forces and primary fields, like the phi ratio is a universal field. There's also matter, and I put it a category called matter and density. So that would be like gravity and time. These are things that you could categorize as time and gravity are archetypes. They're not essentially fundamentally real necessarily. They seem to be more human related to consciousness. And then there's dimensionality when we talk about first, second, third, fourth, fifth dimension, fifth density. So these are archetypes too. They're also alchemical words. And alchemy is its own little bubble I created because within alchemy we have so many different symbols. And then we have archangelic. Archangelic, we have angels, we have archangels, we have avatar level beings, galactic beings, galactic consciousness, the planetary nebulas, and there's all kinds of different ways of talking about that. Cyclical, like cycles, a year, a month, a day, an era. Then you have, as far as cyclical, you have grand conjunctions. You have, and so that goes under the category called cyclical. And then we have energy technology. So these are ways of tapping in, technology itself are ways of archetypes or systems of tapping into the field. We have cavitation, we have transduction from thermal, from many different energy fields. And then we have cultural and mythological. So you can imagine each of these has their own sub-archetypes. And the one in the middle, we talked about that already. So you can see this is, when I started thinking about how am I going to talk about this, I started realizing this is way too big. So I can only talk about one thing, right? Any comments about this?
So then, it's even hard to comment.
Right.
Because it's all going to be wrong. But
Or right, it's all right or all wrong.
It appears that different souls resonate with different archetypes.
Yes.
And I don't know why that is.
Right.
Because it's an idea about our past lives anyway.
Right.
And what we bring in.
Right.
So we don't have the answer of why different souls resonate with different archetypes. And
Right.
I think it's just this
Yeah.
ever-expanding expansion, and it's just to experience everything.
Yes.
And eventually we do experience everything.
Yes. So it's the white light that goes into the prism, and the prism branches out into all the colors, all the different experiences. So that's kind of like what we can be, is all different experiences. Even your political position could be related to your archetype as well. So there's people who are libertarian who fit in that category, neoconservative, conservative, right-wing, left-wing. So there's these political platforms that seem like they're opposite, but really they're different angles in the same thing, maybe.
And what's really, is that okay?
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is that all, like politicians all calibrated the same exact 450.
Right, right.
And if you go over or under that, you really can't fit in to be a politician.
Sure, right.
Because
right.
the Buddha's 550.
Uh-huh.
So it's just
So if you were a world bridger leader, I guess you wouldn't be a politician because you would see all sides.
Right.
Those are the kind of people
Yeah.
we need as politicians.
Right, they really serve a purpose.
Totally.
Wow.
You have something to say about that?
You were asking the question, why do certain people resonate with different archetypes and some people don't? And I would say because of their genetics, because of their heredity. These are inborn, I think that's what it said,
Right.
inborn, genetically determined characteristics.
Yeah.
And that's what determines my resonance with whatever.
But genes,
Right.
they've proven that genes reform all the time now.
Yes,
We're not the
yes.
same genes we came
It's
from.
not fixed, but certainly there's a blueprint or
In
a
any moment it's
resonance.
fixed, in any moment it's fixed.
In any
It
moment?
might change over time, but
Right.
in any moment,
Right.
it determines what we resonate with.
Interesting.
Beliefs,
Yeah.
resonating with your beliefs, it might sort of tend to change your
Yeah, depending
DNA
on your beliefs
orientation.
and your experiences in the world, your genome or your epigenetics shifts based on your perception of reality. So you shift into a different form.
Yeah.
So certainly we are morphic beings, but some of us may be more fixed at this moment. Right.
You keep choosing.
What I see as I sit here and look at the vastness,
Yes.
and I'm seeing, okay, we're looking at the meaning we've given to the all that is. And in the Course in Miracles, it says that when we had the thought of separation, that we're actually now, it was just a tick of time with the thought of separation, and that now we're actually at the end of time looking back on what was in that tick of time. So it's already created in that tick of time, but we are compelled to put meaning on all things. So that's what we did. We put meaning on everything, and it's actually over, and
Right.
there will come a time when we awaken from the thought of separation. And,
Right.
But right now, we're in a place where we're actually examining the all that is, and still looking at all the meaning that we assigned it in the first place.
Right. So it
Yeah.
was over already. It's already done.
Yeah.
And yet there's an echo. It's still being reflected. We're still in a more dense form to make sense out of what's going on.
Vi har lukket. Ja, vi har lukket. Vi
Right.
set en locking.
We believe that we're
We
locked.
will be really.
Yeah.
Believe through all of that.
Right. So that's really interesting. I also noticed that this fits into material. I noticed that we have societal consciousness, alchemy, material. I don't know how to fit that into this big circle, but I noticed that consciousness connects with all these different fields, and so does material, and alchemical, and societal. So I'm going to go through the 13 that I came up with. And so this is the one I am going to talk about, but I'm going to go through all 13. Sacred geometrical archetypes. So the math of God, there's so many different languages of God or form, like the Enneagram, and so we've got the flower of life, the platonic solids, the vector equilibrium, the torus, fractal entity, DNA. So I'm just going to go through these quickly, and then I'll talk about this more. Universal forces and primary fields like phi and the Fibonacci ratios that determine how all nature and all life collapses into the physical universe. The toroidal field connects with this as well. Then there's something called the primer fields, which is based on the torus, which shapes galaxies and nebulas. It's one of the other forces that brings items into material existence. I don't know another way to say that. Biological. So we have morphogenetic archetypes, biological kingdoms, animal kingdoms, bipedal humanoid form archetypes. This also connects with sound because we know that certain sounds will recreate the human vertebrae. Bipedalism has been shown in many experiments to be a universal field of force, just like a crystal is. Morphogenesis, which is like when a cocoon turns into a butterfly. Those are also archetypes for everything else in this existence. Sound and light, cymatics, harmony, music, sympathetic resonance, electromagnetism. Prismic, where a prism breaks things into different spectrums. Dimensionality, I talked about that. Consciousness levels, dimensions, densities. Astrophysical, so galaxies, nebulas, solar, planetary, atmospheric levels within a planet. Lunar, so a lot of planets have moons and they represent something as well. Matter, density, I had to put that in the same category, matter and density, like gravity, time, elements, the periodic table, gas, liquid, solid, crystallinity. So that all fits into the archetypes of matter. Archangelic, like avatars, archangels, ascended masters, and deities. Alchemical, the major arcana, states of consciousness, spiritual processes. So each one of these, clearly, you could spend hours talking, and there's books written about each subject, obviously here. Cyclical archetypes, grand cycles, conjunctions, ages, wheels within wheels, seasons, so that all fits into that category. Mythological, archetypes of the collective unconscious, dreams, emotional states, and we have cultural, and we have languages. So different languages represent different philosophies in relating to the world. Cultures, galactic beings, information fields. So, and this is the last one, 13. How does galactic beings? Well, because different beings, the idea of different beings like Lemurians, the Palladians, the Illyrians, all these different cultures have a different tone or a vibration.
Oh, I see.
So they really
Because they have their cultures, I get it.
Yeah, so they have cultures, so they have their
the
different archetypes.
The other one then.
Well, they do
But-
too.
okay.
So this is the thing about all of these, they all fit into each other.
Yeah.
So there's got to be some way of creating a three-dimensional, four-dimensional computer model where it shows how all these are connected to each other. So I'm sure there's some software that can do that. And then 13, energy technologies. So free energy devices is an example. So free energy is something that's completely natural. And when we meditate and we tune in, we become tuned into different frequencies, and that can give us energy. Just the way that certain technologies, if you wind copper wire, or if you structure plates, or you create lattices in a certain way, it does tap into these fields, just like a transistor would tap into a higher field of energy, just like the sun channels energy from the galactic core. So these energy technologies seem to fit, like there's so many different types of free energy systems that work. Like a crystal, that's a free energy technology. Cavitation, there's people who built cavitation devices which are pumps that create a chain reaction that tap into the vacuum. There's many other things that tap into that 0-point field, and they can be put into different archetypes. So we have electrical, mechanical, electromagnetic, chemical, acoustic, thermal, etc., stuff like that. So you can see, so I just covered all of those bases. You understand why this was so big to cover. And all of this, the primary archetypes would come like from the source, the one, the all, the unifying field, the chi, the prana, the organ. I'm sure there's 100 different names for the universal life force source field.
What's the organ? What is that?
Oh, organ was a Wilhelm Reich. He was a guy that came up with technologies that would tap into these higher fields, and he realized that this field would heal people because it put them back into their original blueprint, cure cancer, that kind of thing. And he called that field the organ field. So he built organ devices that would heal cancer and affect weather and affect everything. Amazing. I'm sure, who's heard of Wilhelm Reich? Right? Yeah, almost everybody, okay. So he coined the term organ. So yeah, I'm going to go into the first one of the 13, and that's all I'm going to really talk about today because we have pretty much 15 minutes left. I find this one the most interesting. Sacred geometry, it's the most exciting.
So we have to extend the 15 minutes.
Yeah, we can do that. Okay, so I believe that sacred geometry was one of the best ways of expressing the creation story from the beginning of form, and how the idea that God stepped outside itself to know itself, to discover itself, and it divided. So one of the ways to represent that is the circle, the original spirit, the all, the one, or the source field. So the universe started with unity and moved outwards. Unity split into duality, male and female. So this is a good archetype right here where it splits into two. So from nothingness, God moved, then God made light. Now, this is really neat because I know that this is in a lot of creation myths, including Genesis, where it describes this process quite well, the division. Yes?
It also happens immediately when an egg is fertilized by the cooperative sperm.
Well, that's exactly right. And so,
cooperating, and then boom, two, just like you're saying.
right, exactly. So every form comes into the universe through this method in biology, in all kinds of different fields. So yeah, mitosis is the same thing, like a cell divides and it branches into two, or there's examples of that. So this is, I believe, from Revelations. Anybody recognize this? And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Did you mention that?
Yeah, I used that last week.
Yeah, that's right. You said that last week, and I found this. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, right? And so then you have the division. And the Vesica Pisces, you have relativity. You've got the male and the female. You've got the dividing. And in the middle, beyond duality, is the Stargate, the Vesica Pisces. That's the source, the light. This relates to Phi and Fibonacci. It relates to almost everything. And then you can see, if I go to the next slide, this is the all-seeing eye. It's one way. You know, CBC has this logo. A lot of big corporations use this logo.
They took it.
Like of course, most of the big corporations use these sacred geometry for their logos, like Shell, Chevron, Exxon. You can imagine all these big corporations using this, the all-seeing eye.
Target.
The target? Right, exactly. Now you can see, when you do the Vesica Pisces within itself multiple times, you see the retina, the pupae, like the pupil, the whole form of the human eye is based on this geometry. So then it divides again, right? So then you have 3, and that's called the Genesis pattern. So this is the beginning of Genesis, the second day. So there's 6 days. God built the world in 6 days. So there's one. So that's 1, 2. So I guess that's the second day, or is it the third day? I don't know. But it's also called the seed of life. No, this is the seed of life here. So the seed of life is after the 6 days. This I guess is the Genesis pattern. But what is this called? Anybody know?
Holy Trinity.
The Holy Trinity. That's it. That's the Holy Trinity, and that's what that symbol is. It means the Holy Trinity. So it's not. I was wrong. This is the Genesis pattern, because this is the incomplete Genesis, and there's the Genesis pattern. So yeah, this is the second day, because you don't count the middle. So that's day 2. This is day 6. So, and then on the 7th day, I guess in the Bible, God took a rest after that, right? He took a snooze. So this is called the seed of life in the Genesis pattern. There it is there. You see that? It's pretty neat. And you can see it on the top right. Yeah, the 6th day of Genesis, in the beginning there were 6, or the world was created in 6 days. The beginning of the creation of the universe, the creation of spirit. So this has many names. I'm sure that we could come up with 100 names for that alone throughout cultures around the world. You can also see that there's the egg of life. When you see that, instead of in 2 dimensions, you see it in 3 dimensions. And the egg of life, all of this will then create the flower of life. We'll get into that. We can talk about that. But if you repeated that pattern from the Genesis symbol and you put circles all around the outside, then you're starting to get the tree of life pattern, which is one of the universal patterns that creates the torus, that pretty much creates everything in form in this universe.
And there's also something, I can't remember how many, but if you do the same size circles, it's always the same number of circles that fit around another circle. I think it's 7.
Well, the sacred pattern, I guess that would be, if you see 6 and then one on top and one on bottom.
Yeah.
It would be 9, wouldn't it?
That would.
So that would be 8 in the middle would be 9.
Three-dimensional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, so,
But it's always the same, if they're all the same size, it's always the same number.
yeah, exactly, like if
It's always
you
the
are,
same number.
you're a kid and you blow bubbles, and all the bubbles are the same size, it'll form into that pattern if you were to blow
Right.
like 9 bubbles, and then it would go right into that pattern,
Also, it
right?
looks like fish eggs as well.
Fish eggs are the same. You see here, once you see 3 dimensions, then you're seeing the hexagon, right? Because the hexagon, you see it
Right.
everywhere. You see it, the beehives, like you see it's a hexagonal pattern. When you see dirt dry in the desert, you always see these hexagonal
Yeah.
cracks. You see that even weather systems, when there's high energy present, weather systems form into hexagonal clouds. This is an interesting phenomenon. A good example is also a place like Saturn, where there's a very high energy vortex coming out of the North Pole. That energy forms all of the vapor into a hexagonal cloud. So there's a lot of examples in that.
So you're saying the hexagonal form is male and
Well, you can.
what's male and female?
So what I'm saying here is male and female. When you look at this pattern, the female form would be this, because it circles. The male form would be the cube. The cube is represented by drawing the centers of all those spheres together.
I was trying to figure that out too.
Yes. So, I mean, you're talking about straight lines. The cube from this dimension represents the absolute male principle, whereas the circles then represent the female principle. So there you have, in this egg of life, you have the female and the male, right? So then you can see on the next slide exactly what you were talking about, which is the birth. So the mitosis, how we divide, this is every being that comes into existence has to go through this splitting process until it eventually creates the humanoid form.
How is that different from the Fibonacci principle? How does that go together, those two? Fibonacci and the flower of life? What does
Okay, they go together in many ways. When you look at the flower of life, it's called different things. It's also called a cell major. This is the cell membrane here. But if you follow the Fibonacci sequence, it fits within this, on this dimension and on 3 dimensions. It's easier to see it on 3 dimensions. Well, we have to sort of advance the slides because it's a lot to talk about. But going from this form into the toroidal field, that toroidal field also creates spin, because we're looking at static images here still.
Yeah.
But there's also a spin force that comes from this. That spin force is part of the toroidal field that emanates from this field. And that has a Fibonacci sequence that radiates out of the North Pole and South Pole. We see it in astrophysics with Hubble Space Telescope. You can look at galaxies, you look at the North Pole. High energy discharges always come out in the Fibonacci sequence. So Fibonacci sequence is one of the fundamental patterns how energy flows. It connects to many, many other things, and we'll look at that too. The way that things grow, they grow in the Fibonacci pattern.
Yeah.
Our hands grow in the Fibonacci sequence. The way that our digits, this compared to this finger, compared to this, compared to this. So all the ratios in nature follow the Fibonacci or the phi ratio. There it is again, the flower of life. You can see here the splitting process again, and then you can see what you were talking about, how the cell splits, divides, and then it will be an embryo after that. So this flower of life, and then we have, this is called the fruit of life, where you take out the other circles. So the fruit of life is an example of a building block called the fruit. It's like a building block for all the Platonic solids. So this is where we're going to start talking about Platonic solids, how they're created from this form. It's considered one of the most sacred symbols in cultures around the world. They found the flower of life in 12 cultures around the world. And in the Vatican, they have that demon that's standing on the flower of life. I don't know if anybody's ever seen that picture. You've seen that? So the Vatican, all around, all the sacred geometry around the Vatican, a lot of the secret society temples around the world have the flower of life, either sculpted or embedded in the stone.
Being guarded by a demon.
Yeah. So there's the fruit of life again in a clean form. it relates to many things, many different processes. The fruit of life has been used as an archetypal symbol to represent many fields of information. Now, with the fruit of life, when you connect all of the centers, in the masculine form, you have Metatron's cube, and the fruit of life is the female version of like the Metatron cube. So Metatron cube is also synonymous with the aura, or the human energy field. The Metatron field spins, and this has also been called in ancient cultures, like the Vedic cultures, the light vehicle of ascension. Very directly related to the star tetrahedron, they are the same. They're synonymous with each other. The star tetrahedron is the main form, and the Metatron cube shows more subtle angles that are part of that structure. Is anybody familiar with the Metatron cube? Yeah.
And this may be off topic,
Yeah.
and if it is,
Right.
we can maybe answer it
Yeah.
later. But I know that, like the Archangel archetype of
Right.
Metatron, actually that's an
Well, Metatron is an Archangel,
yeah,
Ascended Master,
the
yeah.
Ascended Master, I think.
Right.
Yeah. Is
Yeah.
associated with Metatron's cube.
Right.
Right?
Right. So Metatron is the master of technology. Because,
Right.
yeah,
Okay.
because that's good, because that's what's interesting about Archangels is
Yeah.
they represent different domains of information and knowledge. And so Metatron is one of the Archangel beings that influences a lot of things in the world, like technology. So Metatron's been told to be one of the Archangels of technology. So that's one that I'm very strongly associated with myself. I've had this thing go into my body, and it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life when this I didn't even know what it was. I didn't even know Metatron's cube, like about 15 years ago when I had this experience where this crystal being went into my body. It was absolutely amazing. But I found out it was the Metatron cube spinning in the core of my being. It was like, wow, what a magical experience that was. Has anybody had anything similar to that? I've talked to people who've had that experience too, so it's a common experience people have, this Metatron activation of the star tetrahedron.
I've seen it in different clients.
Yeah,
I've
you've seen it in
happen
clients,
where
yeah.
they- Not every person, but
Yeah.
if they're high vibration, I've seen things like that come in and replace other things that left.
So from the Metatron's cube, or this form here, the fruit of life, it's the same thing, one's male, one's female, you get the 5 platonic solids. So the 5 platonic solids, all the faces are the same, all of the points, all of the edges basically touch the sphere. So that there's like 4 different things that determine what a platonic solid is, but I'm going to keep moving forward. This is it's fun to look at the images anyway. Like, it doesn't matter if you know what it means, it's like, it's really interesting because these are building blocks of life.
Just looking at them help you to.
Just looking at them affects your
Resonate with them.
consciousness,
Yes.
which is so incredible. I have a crop circle card deck here, and the crop circles fit into these platonic solids. So when you look at these crop circles for a long time, definitely notice that it changes your energy field. It's so amazing. You close your eyes, you can see these images, and seeing those images affects your unconscious to the point where it actually enhances your energy field, or at least it does mine. So the platonic solids can fit into the different forms of matter: energy, water, earth, air, fire, void, so the elements. So in alchemy, the platonic solids have very specific meanings to do, and many researchers discovered that all the elements in the periodic table fit into those 5 platonic solids. Pretty much everything does, and these platonic solids can transform from one to another. Each can transform into each other. So you can look up on YouTube how they transform, and there's combinations. Like when you look at crystals and the way stones grow, the way crystals grow, they fit into these categories. And also, there's different subsets of these that, so there's the platonic solids again. There's the example of how the Metatron's cube creates the platonic solids. Then there's here's some Neolithic stones. I mean, these Neolithic stones and these types of forms everywhere around the world to ancient history. So they were obviously very sacred to a lot of the Neolithic people. It's amazing they were able to create those. It's pretty cool. And then there's other shapes that are transformational, and where you snub and you stellate the edges. And there's the second level beyond the Platonic solids called the Archimedean solids, regular polyhedron, and then there's the opposite, what they call the Catalan solids, or there's lots of, it goes on and on. You can imagine how complex this gets. The third level formations that come from that are these called the Johnson solids. There's 92 stellation forms. So
When you say solids related to matter.
yeah, so these relate directly back to the Platonic solids. They just get snubbed or
Oh, I see,
stellated,
okay.
whereas stellation means that you take a flat plane and you put a star on it, which is the same dimension as the distance between the two vertices. Yeah, you got to study. It's worth studying. It's kind of interesting. And then this is one of those stellated dodecahedrons that appears all around the world. This one's in inlaid panel on the floor of St. Mark's Basilica in Italy from the 15th century. It has a lot of...
that was channeled.
Yeah, pretty much, exactly.
No kidding.
So there's Metatron's cube, or the star tetrahedron, spinning, activating the light body. It's another way of looking at it with a male and a female, very colorful image. This is a beautiful image that shows when the Metatron's cube spins, it creates the torus here. So this is an example of the torus with the star tetrahedron, and the torus eventually is one of the forms that gives you the template for all of the physical universe. Of course, we could go into that for a long time, just learning about that. That's just fun looking at these images. Any comments about any of this? Am I blowing your mind yet?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
People try to understand this stuff, but you don't have to understand it.
I hear it through sound.
Now, all of these Platonic solids can also form through cymatics.
And especially the English
Yes?
is interrupting it for me.
Oh, for sure. So that's why you gotta not need to understand it.
That's right.
Okay, yeah, I notice we come from a culture that's inherently still masculine, trying to figure it out. You don't need to figure it out, you just need to look at the images, really. I could talk about all of what this means, but don't worry about understanding it. Right?
Yeah, it feels good to just see it. Like sometimes when I'm closing my eyes at night, if I've been praying or meditating or whatever, I see all the geometries dancing in different colors.
Right.
And they always, it's always coherent. It never breaks. It
Yes.
changes patterns,
Yes.
changes colors, but it never interrupts itself. Just morphs from one thing to
Yeah, that's
another.
right. It never interrupts.
So that's,
Yes.
and I don't feel like I need to understand it.
No, you don't need to understand that, because that would be
Well,
complex geometry that the human mind couldn't
it
understand.
shuts it off the second you're thinking about it.
Well, yeah, you don't need to understand it. Experiencing is way better than trying to logically understand something.
Yeah, and the only other thing is that torus the torus is incredible, and it's good to see more images of it, because I think
Yes.
it helps us. I definitely work within huge, my torus and the
Yes.
client's torus, and then there's a healing torus in
Yes.
the room, and
Yes.
it's just really
It's
palpable.
very powerful.
Yeah,
And the Antaurus encapsulates
Clean.
all these forms.
clean and beautiful.
All these forms eventually are in the torus, and the Hebrew alphabet is one of these alphabets that's fractal and holographic, and every letter in the Hebrew alphabet fits on the torus as a line. So,
Wow.
well, yeah, that's what's amazing with the Hebrew
Wow.
alphabet. There's researchers just talk about the Hebrew
Yeah.
alphabet and how it's related to the torus, and each of the Hebrew alphabet letters, how they move, how a straight line, a torus, is a hyperform. It's actually beyond 3 dimensions. It's multidimensional. And when you see a straight line on a torus, it curves. If you were to draw a straight line on a torus, it could go this way and around like this, or it can go like this. And then you can see these strange forms that form all the letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And all the letters in the Hebrew alphabet represent archetypes. They represent feelings and emotions and forms of being.
Wow.
So you don't need to understand all the letters of the alphabet, but each letter of the alphabet is a state of being. And there's people around here who've studied that, and you give great, like I know Joseph Mark, he could talk about all the letters and how they relate to energy. He's pretty studied with with that. It's really interesting.
I used to be a Jehovah's Witness, and I would always refer to Yahweh.
Yahweh?
Yeah, until I was 21 years old.
Right.
And I remember, like, when I would say that word, you know, Yahweh,
Yes.
as opposed to Jehovah.
Right.
I would use Yah. I would feel frequencies
Wow.
activating in my body. And I was a young girl.
That's
You
amazing.
know, and I was very empathic. I didn't know what was going on.
Wow.
But even when I wrote it, or when I looked at it, you know, just JHWH,
Right.
those Hebrew words, it was very activating.
That's amazing.
I'd
So,
love to hear a talk just on that.
yeah, so the energy vector that moves on the torus creates the Hebrew alphabet, but each of the letters represents a sound and an emotion and a feeling too.
Yeah, but how does that go for other alphabets? Like
Well,
Hebrew?
there are other alphabets that are sacred in the sense that they're holographic.
Aramaic?
Aramaic, exactly. That's another one. Yeah.
And was it Hindu? What about that one?
Sanskrit? Yeah, Sanskrit is one. Yeah, exactly. So there are, and then there's also the Hopi alphabet too. And so, yeah. So there are alphabets, and there's other alphabets that they find, they dig up in archaeological sites that are really, really old, like way older than geologists ever want to admit. And they have never been able to transcribe them, but they're also described alien-like. And then you have the alphabets that come out of the Mayans, but it's before the Mayans, whatever the culture is that was there when the Mayans came, that culture.
The Anasazi from down south
Yeah,
apparently
the
had the
Olmecs, right.
first language.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Sorry,
the
what was that you
first
said?
alphabet.
The Anasazi from the west?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
The what?
The Anasazi from
the
yeah,
southwest.
they're now. They're
Well, maybe that's the
no
same
longer
as
here.
the ancient Mayan, before the Mayan
Right.
culture.
Inca.
Oh, it's very old.
Older than mine.
It's older than
Right.
Sanskrit or Hebrew.
Yeah, well, there you go. And so maybe the Hopi are connecting with that alphabet as well.
I don't know.
Well, because they have how they in their
Well, it's their
Prophecies.
ancestors.
yeah, their ancestors. They got it from their ancestors, the brothers of light. They call them the brothers of light. You don't want to say white brotherhood yet. People are still don't like that, but
What are they called?
Anasazi.
Anastasia.
Anna, not with a T.
Wow, you could make a 10-year course out of it.
well, this. I'm barely getting through the first of the 13, and I know that you would love it if we went through just the sound. If we just talked about acoustics and resonance and sound and music and harmony, that is such a beautiful talk. Bring in tuning forks. When you have two tuning forks tuned slightly together, you get the sympathetic resonance, which creates spin, and you can feel the spin in your body. Binaural
Yeah,
beats.
where you get it off beat and then it makes a different beat instead of your head.
Harmonizes your brain waves. Binaural beats. When something is it's something that's like 500 hertz and it's like 10 hertz off of that creates a binaural beat.
Which one is it?
Seven.
So what is it? Hertz?
Seven beats
Yes.
per second.
Oh, that's interesting. But yeah, there's sympathetic resonance also when you have two notes that are close, and you get that whoa, 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 that such an amazing sound.
Right.
So it affects your consciousness directly.
Yeah, somebody was noticing that when they hit the ting shaws, they're
Yeah.
off beat like that. And I thought,
Right.
oh, that's too bad they couldn't get them the same. It's like.
Oh my God, you don't want them the same.
Yeah, I know.
That's dead and static. The differential
Right.
creates the spin,
Right.
and I know David Srita talks a lot about differentials.
Yeah.
The tones, I did them all
The tones.
last year, and
Yeah.
they, very often if I would hum or make a sound, I got the third, it sounded like it was coming out of me, but it sounded
Overtones.
alien.
Right. Yes, the extraterrestrial,
'Cause I'd
right?
never heard those sounds before.
The overtones.
Yeah.
Well, can you do this sound? Try a higher one.
And harmonic, it has to be harmonic.
So if it's slightly off, you start hearing the sympathetic harmony. Amazing.
It is sound of light.
Were you going to say something about this?
No, don't go yet.
No, you want to stick on
You
this?
haven't
Oh
said
yeah, I
anything
can't
about
avoid
it.
the tree of life.
Yeah.
Like, that's like, well, that's
Yeah.
so important. Actually, the tree of life, when they've been trying to figure out the puzzle of the tree of life for a long time. And when this, actually, I think it was Nassim who first did this, Nassim Haramein, when he took this tree of life and connected it at 8 vertices. And they connected to show the vector equilibrium in the middle, which also represents the 64 the 64, the hexagrams of the I Ching, or the 64 codons of the DNA. It's the same thing.
Oh, I
And so
didn't
the-
know that.
Well, yeah, well, this is what's interesting with the Tree of Life. It represents
Wow.
all of the forms, all the genetic forms, all the different genomes. What do they call them?
Wow, I didn't know that. I use the I-Ching.
Yeah, well, it's related to the I Ching, the 64 hexagrams,
Okay.
which is the 64 codons?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Wow.
The Hebrew Kabbalah talks about that, and I can't remember. Do you know
Right.
it, Jerry? When just no.
The Hebrew Kabbalah, and then the Rosicrucian cross. I mean, all these secret societies use this symbol.
Yeah,
It represents the chakra system as well.
yeah.
And there's an extended version of this that represents the 12 chakras as well. Really amazing stuff.
There are a lot
That's
of
right, the 12th
high
Sephirah.
spiritual people with groups all over this world
Yes.
using that symbol.
All over the world, and this also represents the Atlantis crystal of Atlantis. I don't know if you know the whole mythology behind the Atlantis. There's so many stories. Everybody says Atlantis was this, Atlantis was that, Atlantis was Antarctica, oh, Atlantis was Cuba. But Atlantis was all over the world. But there was one island that Plato talked about, the Atlantis island, which had was a crystalline structure. This is according to a lot of the channel material and mythology. But different civilizations at Atlantis that represent different notes and colors filled in these locations on the island, except for this one, and that's the one that apparently the, what do they call them? The Zeta culture that destroyed Mars landed on that and screwed up the Atlantis project. There's all this amazing information just about this Tree of Life and how it represents the crystal of Atlantis.
The Vaitaha,
Do you know about this?
the Vaitaha people in New Zealand, they are a very special tribe.
Yes.
And it's led by women, and they do meditations, and after they pass it, they told me that I am them, and I said, no, I am not them. Therefore I was not born in this body. But they felt the vibration of sound through me, through Syrian.
Right, Syrian.
Therefore they have been guided through Syrian.
Yes.
And this particular tribe, I have book, very ancient book about it. It is the secret dimension, secret sound or something. So they actually resonate. That when you are there with them in the meditation, you hear the resonance.
Right.
And this is where I was having very difficult time with my inner music. Therefore I hear inner sound from childhood. And they have been hearing it. They came to me through their dreams. The dreams guided them to find me.
Right.
And they have been hearing me.
Yes.
On distance.
Yes.
And they totally tied me to the chair. It was crazy.
Oh, they didn't want you
They
to...
tied me to the chair that I can never leave.
Oh, they were like...
Physically tied me.
Yeah, well, they didn't realize that they were that too, right? So they didn't need to tie you
That's
down.
also I was,
Right.
my God, I have to still complete my karma. Please, divine, guide me.
Yeah.
So anyway, so there was a very incredible experience for me in New Zealand.
Wow.
To have that feeling of that Syrian energy. Therefore, this is my home.
Yeah.
And I had it everywhere through them.
Sirius is a very strong starseed on the planet as far as beings who...
I know that yeah.
Exactly.
That just resonated.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So it is so strong that
The dolphin
I was
beings.
having a very hard time to leave.
Right.
Half of the airport had been the people.
Yeah, well, they
didn't want me to leave.
Well, that's because they forgot that they were that too, right?
That I was all the time
Right. And,
resonating to them. And
well, that's really interesting.
They do something very beautiful
Oh, yeah.
that I love.
Wow.
When they speak, they first sing.
Wow.
And they always invited me to sing with them.
Right.
Whoever it was, someone.
So when you sing at a certain tone, you resonated that serious frequency to those beings.
I was going to say she activated it.
She activated, that's
Yeah,
right.
that's right. And
Yeah.
what was starting to happen, that you speak in very different way.
Yeah.
I feel if Harper or whoever is on top, or those people will start to sing first.
Yeah, well, that'd be really nice if Harper started singing,
If we
yeah.
all just sing to
They
one
will be,
another.
they open up, they open up.
That's right.
And so this is what I really love there. When they never spoke without singing.
It's like the native people.
Yeah,
The
they
native
are.
people
Well, that's pretty
always
cool.
start with singing, don't they?
Anybody else want to say anything about the tree of life?
Yeah, me.
Okay.
How does that coincide with the chakras?
Can you had does that relate to what she just asked?
No.
Okay. How does that coincide with the chakras? That's a good
When
question.
there's 12, it relates to,
Because it
because we
represents
have
a human.
12, we have
Yeah.
7 centers in the body and 7 out of the body.
Yeah, but they're not
Above us.
necessarily above, they can be around.
Well, that's the
us.
thing is, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but these ones are divided. But really, there's 7 layers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it is showing the 7 chakras there. But obviously, well, this is the heart chakra, and you can see here, whatever these chakras are, if you were to see that from the side, they would be 7. And you know how like some chakras, the chakras all emanate out this way and back that way, and then there's all the minor meridians as well as the major meridians.
Some of the, in the Kabbalah, they represent the shoulders, the chakra points in the shoulders.
Well, yeah,
and
see,
the
here's an
hips.
example of how it could be represented right there. The shoulders, yeah, like the elbows and the shoulders,
Yeah.
and the temple are the other chakras, where you see the sacrum, then you see the heart chakra, and then you see the kundalini chakra there.
Dan, I just wanted to say that the
Yeah.
Palladians say that the tree of life, the tree represents the body, the physical body, and the life is our blood.
Okay,
So, put that in your pipe and
well,
smoke
that's
it.
interesting. The tree is your body, and the life is the blood?
Yeah,
Okay, because then,
Light or life?
the life.
yeah, life,
Tree
because
is
the
the
blood,
body.
Oh, I see.
the blood
Life
is
our
like the
blood.
ether.
So it'd be
It-
our DNA or.
That's right, it
blood,
flows.
the
The life
composition
forces
of
in the
our-
blood.
That's right, and it's no doubt why the blood cells are like toroidal shaped, and also the heart is toroidal shaped, the field. So, and then blood has lots of iron, so it's magnetic, and so that makes sense.
Yeah. All the fluids of the body, including blood, are
Yeah.
the same as what you're saying.
Right.
Because we're many different fluids.
We are many different
cerebral,
fluids.
spinal.
And there's the fluids that we don't see that we need instruments like the EEG or the squid to see, and those are the, what people have called the biophoton energy field, the mirror neuron field. So there's all those fields as well. There are types of fluids, they call it ectoplasm. It's been known by many names.
Cerebral spinal fluid is
Yeah.
the most powerful fluid in our body.
Wow. So I'm just going to go through the rest of the pictures here because the Taurus would be the one we could end with. But here's an example of, well, here's major fields created from the flower of life. The Taurus, the vector equilibrium, the platonic solids, the enneagram, the Metatron's cube, star tetrahedron. But the Taurus creates a field that then affects the northern pole of Saturn. You can see it becomes hexagonal. So the hexagon is embedded with the vector equilibrium into the toroidal field. It's all connected. I mean, let's see, there's another picture of it. There's the field that I'm talking about. So now we can see it all in one. If you see that spiral, there's the Fibonacci spiral that comes out of galaxies, out of everything. It's an exchange mechanism that spins, energy exchanges and goes back into itself. So it comes up and then it goes down. So the same as our aura, right?
And the center is our heart.
In the center is our heart, exactly. It's
And
Very apple-like.
toroids and
it's like an apple. Well, that's been called the apple. Yes.
aren't toroids also an expression of Taurus?
Well, this is a Taurus, yes.
No, but I mean, are toroids like the
Doesn't have the bite.
Yes.
also an expression of?
Yes, it is an expression of the Taurus. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's a little toroid on my necklace that
Yeah.
David made that you got one too. David and Crystal made that? Cool.
Quite a while ago, somebody brought in a toroidal type of fabric. A fabric.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that rolls.
There's these
Taurus.
also.
Whose was it? Was it yours, Annie?
No, it was.
You could roll it.
Yeah, here
it
we
was
are.
fascinating.
Schumann.
This is like a, see, people are creating these over Unity devices that power little LEDs. You see this?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, people are following the same toroidal field. There's this guy, Marco Rodin, who uses this, and he's figured out the pattern of how electrons like to flow. And if you actually put copper wire in the pattern that electrons flow in, it creates an over unity.
Wow.
And you power little light bulbs and stuff with it, right? Little LEDs. because it's just like an invisible power radio. You ever heard of those? It's basically tapping in the field. If you structure the wires properly, you automatically have a free energy device. And that's how that works. But when you put a whole bunch together, then yeah, you constructively...
You got yourself a car.
Well, yeah, you could have, well, maybe, if you did it right. Actually, that's what the Searle effect generator is. It's really a good example of tapping into that 0 point field. There's different devices that tap into that, clearly controversial because we live in an age of corporatocracy, so it's a threat, but eventually that stuff will be mainstream. But there's an example.
Yeah, what do you have there?
Oh, somebody made that for me, and it's basically a harmonic inductor which helps for healing.
Hang it around your neck?
You plug it into, you can plug it, it inducts on its own, it's really healthy, but you can also plug it into an iPod and generate sounds like that David makes. So you can pass that around if you want.
Yeah, cool.
So we're almost done our slideshow. This is the primer fields, which is another way of looking at the female and male aspect of the toroidal field, which really is one of the best examples that shows the structure of almost everything in our universe, galaxies and nebulas. Bo, you talked about primer fields. Do you remember this guy who talked about the primer fields?
What's his name?
I can't remember. He unfortunately died recently, but he has like a 4-hour video just on the primer fields. These two magnetic bowls that you come further and closer, and the way they created the field around them, how the field changes. It's really amazing. I would strongly suggest people go look up primer fields. Another example here, the way the electrons flow in the field. These are other examples of the torus. So.
The first one looks like that thing that I was just trying to describe.
Well, yeah, that's
in one day.
And that's what that is, right?
They brought it in. Who owns a thing?
Oh yeah, somebody brought something like that in.
Taurus thing.
Yeah.
The one that rolls.
Yeah, the one that rolls, yeah.
Srimai.
Huh?
Srimai is the one that brought it in.
Oh, she doesn't come anymore.
No, I haven't seen it for a
Oh,
while.
it's so fascinating just to play
Yeah, I
with
know,
that.
I took it home with me and played with
Did
it
you?
for...
Did you? I did.
Okay, guys. Well,
Dad?
yeah.
Where did you get
You
this?
going?
Oh, I'll tell you in a bit. A friend of mine made that for
You're
me,
down for a couple
but
of
she
weeks.
can make you one too if you want.
It's really exciting.
You do.
So we have so much we could talk about with sacred geometry, and all the archetypes. If you look at these images, I've got this crop circle card deck you can look at, but if we tune into these images, we can really help ourselves. And I'm not sure what else to say about this, but I can just end the talk now.
Can we get another time to talk about more?
How do we conclude?
Maybe we can hang around and pick Dan's brain. The board has to get together today. We have a meeting to discuss
Okay.
our future,
Right.
I mean, what's
Oh,
going
that,
on.
yeah.
And we really have to have a meeting, but this has been pretty fascinating.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So we got through part 1 of 2 of sacred geometry, 13 parts, 2 parts for each, so it's like just 26 more episodes to go.
I like the harmony, the one about the resonance.
Harmonic
but
resonance,
yeah,
yes.
Let's do that.
Thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you.